Hello and welcome. I am Zabraxi. Have you ever just wanted to skip my little intro there? But then who would know who I am? Oh yeah, that'll do it.
Oh, the cutscene. What an amazing time of not playing the video game. I still remember all these years later when I first saw that Blaster Master intro and thought to myself, man, that is cool. And that's the thing, right? Cutscenes are kind of cool. I mean, how do you look at that famous Final Fantasy IX Black Waltz cutscene and say it doesn't look awesome?
I mean, it's really not that hard. Watch. That cutscene doesn't quite look... Jesus, what was that? I just wanted to say the cutscene doesn't look... Holy shit.
An incredible cutscene can truly be something of awe and wonder. They can grab the player's attention and take them on a roller coaster ride of emotions through excitement and even tragedy. I mean, I can't have been the only kid playing through a PS1 JRPG who hoped around every corner that I'd have the opportunity to feast my eyes on yet another life-changing cutscene, right? Well, yeah, I mean, they look like crap by today's standards, but these things were mind-blowing back in the day. I'm pretty sure that me seeing Sephiroth burn down Nibelheim is a core memory in my life. It's not like cutscenes just spawned into existence during the 32 and 64-bit generation of gaming either. That legendary opening of Blaster Master I mentioned, or hey, the equally as impressive Ninja Gaiden intro, they really stuck with people. But why though? The forever ironic argument about this topic is that cutscenes are about as non-interactive as it gets, but they are loved when included into video games. About as interactive of an art form as we currently have. Look up video game design sins on the internet and one particular line will come up constantly. Don't take control away from the player. Always ensuring the player has agency has become a core pillar of game design. And it's obvious why interactivity would be critical in an interactive art form.
I don't know about you all, but personally, my favorite part about playing video games is taking this controller, tossing it aside, leaning back, and not playing the video game. Damn, I love video games.
As technology developed and we moved further down the generations, something happened. Cutscenes started to be everywhere, and they were awesome. While Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo were battling it out on the console front, developers were pushing their cinematics and graphics teams to their limits. CGI at this point was finally starting to hit this threshold where everyone, even non-gamers, were in awe of what was possible. I would argue that it was this era specifically that started to pivot gaming into quote-unquote the real deal. And this momentum and increase has only continued as time has gone on. This was the video game industry's moment of adolescence where they wanted to show off just how mature video games could be. Let's not forget Wind Waker's core criticism at the time was almost exclusively about it being childish. Games were finally getting tested on their validity, and what better way to ensure that success than to copy the most recent new kid on the block, film.
It was around this time when phrases like movie like quality or Hollywood budget started to get thrown around and video games were finally getting legitimized. And what better way to capitalize on that than to take video games and make them more like movies?
The main driving forces behind cutscenes during this time was story. Lots and lots of story. And that cinematics offered the player a way to experience something that gameplay technology at the time was just simply incapable of. I mean, how cool was it to see the party grinding down the rails in Final Fantasy X? How cool was it to do the QuickTime events in Ninja Blade where you slam a wrecking ball into a massive spider? All of those things were awesome. But then, something hit me. There I was, playing through Bayonetta on my 360, when I realized something. I was playing a game where I was fighting a boss where literal galaxies were being thrown at me. I was playing a game where literal galaxies were being thrown at me. Playing. It occurred to me that these amazing and awesome moments in games had been mostly relegated into non-interactive cutscenes lately. I hadn't been able to play many of the cool parts. It was as if gaming had shifted into pushing memorable moments into cinematics, with gameplay serving as a delivery system for those cinematic set pieces across the journey. If I can play a game where I can dodge galaxies, then why would I ever want to watch a cool thing happen ever again? That Jubileus fight was so much fun, and I'd always want to play more than watch. From this point on, I started to notice something, and that was just how many dang cutscenes there were in video games. They were everywhere.
Oh, come on!
In storytelling, there's a mantra of sorts that everyone has beaten into their own heads, and others included. Show, don't tell. For example, in books, you want to have the dialogue show that a character is an arrogant narcissist, not just tell the reader that they are. The same goes for film, theater, and every other medium. In gaming, this is, or it should, be extra pertinent and adhered to because now you have full interactivity. With video games, you can now take show, don't tell a bit further into play, don't show. In these past few years, games have started to make a transition of sorts. Instead of having fully separated cutscenes and cinematics in order to tell you the story, we are now in the age of what I like to call the talking tour.
Oh, trust me, you know what the talking tour is.
Since technology has only gotten better, developers have figured out that you don't need to take a harsh cut into a pre-rendered cutscene in order to tell a story. Instead, now games will just transition into a cutscene where all player control is essentially taken away or limited to such a degree that your agency is practically zero. Typically, this is done so by forcing the player to walk as another NPC info dumps for 4 to 5 minutes. And how often does this really happen though?
All the time.
Let's take God of War 2018 for example here. This is an action game through and through that takes roughly 20 hours to beat or so. Would you like to take a guess at how many cutscenes there are that either completely remove or severely limit player control? 5 hours worth. Now, some people might not think anything of this, but isn't it just a little weird that a quarter of the playtime in an action game is spent not actioning the game? I was playing through Tales of Arise not too long ago and was thoroughly loving it, but holy crap, there is so much talking, and I liked it. I was invested into the story for sure. I was enjoying where the plot was going, but I wanted to play the game more. Color me awkwardly impressed when I discovered that of this 40-hour-long journey, there are 17 hours of cutscenes. I could have binged the first 2.5 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender with that amount of time. And these cutscenes weren't even talking tours. These were just straight up cutscenes. Metal Gear Solid 4 famously had roughly 10 hours of cutscenes in its 20-hour journey. Half of the game isn't even a game. Kojima did eventually decide to rein that back in with only 3 to 4 hours in MGS5, only to crank that sucker right back up for Death Stranding. Just in case anyone thinks, by the way, that I'm only picking on games that you think I might not like, Final Fantasy VII Remake was one of my favorite games of 2020. In fact, it was probably my favorite game of that year, and almost a third of that game is either locked away control to show off a cutscene or yet another talking tour as you're forced to slowly strut your way down an alleyway as characters get you up to speed.
Oh, you mean that a plate falling and killing tens of thousands of people was sad? Well, thank God you told me that.
So, is the point that I'm trying to get at that cinematics and cutscenes in games are bad?
No, of course not.
So then games should just keep doing what they're doing then?
No, of course not.
Every entertainment art form has its core strengths that it should look to leverage. Now, to be fair, this is a bit of a broad statement. Just because video games have the strength of interactivity doesn't mean I hold some wild opinion that games cannot ever take control away and still be considered a game. I mean, there are definitely some designers who might need to hear that in order to keep it in the back of their mind, but to aggressively limit games to that narrow window of interactive and only interactive without any other limitation of control, that's not the point I'm trying to make here. There are amazing ways to tell stories through gameplay, and even through the loss of control. Super Metroid does this incredibly well. While battling Mother Brain, you'll be trying to destroy her while dodging attacks. Eventually, she'll charge up and unleash an attack that seems incredibly difficult to avoid. Truth is, it's impossible to. You're forced to take this hit as the baby Metroid, the creature you've been attempting to save, sweeps in instead to save you, the player. While you're completely immobile because the devastation of this blast, Mother Brain comes back too and hurls a flurry of attacks at the baby, eventually ending its life. The resurgence of power given to Samus and the desire for vengeance by the player makes the return of control all that much sweeter as you completely light up Mother Brain.
Fuck you, Mother Brain. Fuck you.
Another example of potentially perfect storytelling through loss of control comes from Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. Alright, spoiler warning by this game because it's not that old, so if you don't want to get this ruined, then be sure to skip ahead until the Pidgeotto, our spoiler Pidgeotto is off screen. So Brothers is a story-based puzzle game about two young boys trying to save their father, with the primary mechanic that your left hand controls one of the two boys and your right hand controls the other. Much of the interactivity comes from having to maneuver the two boys around, each with their own strengths, in order to further progress. Many times you'll need to utilize the entire controller to move and interact with both characters at once. And then, one of them dies. While this as a story moment is sad enough on its own, what makes this utterly soul-crushing, and giving me a little bit of goosebumps saying it again, is that when you bump into the next puzzle where that brother would have been helpful, and your hands naturally start to act as that other half of the controller, only to have nothing happen.
Fuck you, Brothers. Fuck you, dude.
While a cutscene is able to convey some pretty strong emotions, what makes video games truly special is that moment in Brothers. That moment where you physically move your hands and there's no response. Where the interactivity thrusts the trauma into your heart more aggressively than anything strictly visual could. So then why do video games utilize cutscenes and the talking tour so damn much?
Because it's easy.
Creating these interactive moments like Super Metroid and Brothers is incredibly difficult, let's be honest. These are truly standout moments with yet another that we'll touch on later. So instead, it is often best to just go with the sure thing. There's a lot of risk in getting that interactive moment wrong. But there's something we know that works. Film has been incredibly well refined over its over-century-long life now, so it's incredibly easy and consistent to utilize the same techniques as Hollywood in order to tell a story in video games. We all know it works, so why not utilize it? That's the designer viewpoint, but the player viewpoint is equally important here. You and I are conditioned and calibrated to plot devices and styles we observe on television and in movies. We're accustomed to it, and it's familiar. So when an awesome cinematic moment happens in a game, the lack of control doesn't immediately bother us because the payoff is worth it and the delivery method is comfortable.
Finally, something simple to understand.
But video games are a bit more complicated.
Oh, come on!
They consist of modeling, music, storytelling, movies, basically every art form that has ever existed is smashed into one project and then is expected to somehow be woven into the player's hands through the interactivity the medium is founded upon. Because of so many potential tools, then it should be easy to convey the most impressive stories ever conceived, right? Well, no, it can often make delivering that plot even more convoluted. We just haven't gotten very good at interactive storytelling yet. But designers know that cutscenes can't be the peak. They have found the current compromise, which allows for exposition and cool moments while keeping control in the hands of the player. The talking tour. Ironically though, these segments might be even worse in some ways than just having a simple cutscene. Why? Well, because these are almost never skippable. You are quite literally forced to hold forward on that joystick while something you might not care about has to be overly explained at an excruciating pace.
Oh my god, I get it. Kratos is old. Can I just play the game?
Okay, so then where do we and gaming itself go from here then? Well, there are two paths, active and passive storytelling. For this, we're going to use the definitions provided by Matt Sparks, former columnist of the Learning Guild. He claims that passive storytelling is where the audience simply watches or listens, aka the cutscene or the talking tour we've discussed. Active storytelling, though, is where the audience, you, the player, participates and interacts with the experience, where the player's actions and decisions are necessary in order for the story to even occur and be experienced. Passive storytelling isn't necessarily worse than active, by the way. The early parts of Disc 2 in The Legend of Dragoon shows an awesome cutscene of an event called the Dragoon Wars, an epic battle that took place long before the events of the game itself. The primary reason this cutscene in particular works so well as a narrative tool is because a character is telling the party a story of the war already. So the cinematic that we see is simply a visualization of the tale that we're hearing for the very first time. Active storytelling, on the other hand, well, in recent years, there seems to stand a developer who has absolutely nailed active storytelling.
Nintendo.
No.
Blizzard.
Nope.
Sony.
Nuh-uh.
From Software.
No. Oh, yes, actually.
Nailed it. We're gonna talk about Lost Kingdoms, aren't we?
Actually, Kingsfield.
Oh. Oh, okay. The heck is that?
The opening hours of Kingsfield the Ancient City is a masterful example of From Software learning how to engage in active, or otherwise known as environmental storytelling. We're not told that this world is devastated, dying, and bleak. Instead, we are left to experience it. We are left to discover the dried up spring of healing. We stumble upon an old man who is desperately looking for his missing wife, only for us to return to him later and find that he is already dead. Playing through this now is like peering through the eyes of Demon Souls and Dark Souls' eldest brother. So, which is better? Active or passive storytelling? Well, actually you need both. It's not one or the other on this one. However, in the realms of video games, then activeness should clearly be the goal, since interactivity is the very core of the methodology of this video game thing we're all doing. Let's take a direct comparison of two AAA games that released within a year of each other and who decided to tackle storytelling in radically different ways. The Last of Us is seen by many as one of, if not the greatest PlayStation 3 exclusive, and one of the most influential games ever. I mean, the thing has a television series at this point, so it clearly did something right. Arguably one of the most critically acclaimed segments in the game is actually right at the start. The first 15 minutes or so is so beloved. So then why don't I like it?
Yep. I knew that was coming.
So we start off with you playing as Sarah, Joel's daughter, inside of the house. Your only input is to walk around the home until a neighbor seemingly has gone insane and breaks into the house, where all of your control is now taken away from you as Joel shoots the infected. Sarah is then pulled out of the house and put into a truck where you embark on a several-minute-long talking tour as exposition is just dropped on you. After the 5-minute car ride is done, where all you could do at this point is pan the camera around, you crash, get a QuickTime event, and now you take over Joel, where you take Sarah and walk through the chaos of the city until eventually bumping into a soldier during a cutscene where famously Sarah is shot and killed. And the game now truly begins. This 15-minute intro is peak passive storytelling. You have almost no control other than panning the camera and occasionally pressing forward in between cutscenes. Is it good though? Honestly, yeah, it's a great movie, but it's not a good display at all of what games are capable of. And the worst part to me is where Sarah gets shot. For example, what if you had full control of Joel while holding Sarah and begging the soldier not to shoot? What if you had to hold still and the moment you move, the moment you, the player, interact with the controller to even turn slightly or to look around, the soldier gets jumpy and fires at you? Heck, the PS3 actually had motion controls here, so what if you just shook your hands too much and that fidgety just got the soldier on edge? This would dramatically increase the trauma of this opening even further, and more importantly, would instill the same guilt into the player as it does for Joel during the entire adventure. This brings us to one of the most shocking games I think I've ever played as a counterexample to The Last of Us, Spec Ops: The Line. It's not the most incredible in terms of gameplay, but interactive storytelling is done amazingly here, and it was released a full year before The Last of Us. 2 points I want to mention. First is the famous white phosphorus scene. This scene, by the way, just honestly can be a bit tough to see, so feel free to skip this section of the video if you are even remotely squeamish regarding graphic deaths.
Put the spoiler Pidgeotto back up, because this one's a bit rough.
Throughout some intense shootouts and horrific actions by the opposing forces, you finally stumble upon a base of operations equipped with white phosphorus. In order to stop these monsters, you and your squad hijack the white phosphorus weapons and unleash one of the most nightmarish weapons of war onto the enemy before they can unleash it on you. Keep in mind that those stationed in this base have committed horrific war crimes against humanity, worse than you could think of. There's this oddly sick and twisted satisfaction by both the character and the player as you finally eradicate this area in a truly grotesque manner. That is, except that everyone you've just killed was entirely innocent. Your perception was wrong. These were the people you were trying to help and save, and the majority of them were innocent children and civilians at that. But because you, the player, hit those buttons, because you, the player, fired those weapons, that gut-wrenching, devastating feeling just doesn't connect with the main character, but it also slams right into your own heart and soul. I can still vividly remember my first time playing through this, and my mind just racing, my ears ringing, my heart pumping, and my stomach just churning as I felt sick about what I just did, as I realized just how frighteningly easy it is to turn into a mass murdering war criminal out of the best of intentions. Another example of player choice and active storytelling in Spec Ops is when you have to push through a crowd of aggressive civilians. Again, in many games, this would be a cutscene or a talking tour as you push through the crowd and get spat on or something. Not in Spec Ops. Here, you have the option that many never explore. You can shoot your weapons over the head of the civilians and scare them out of your way, sparing their lives. Or you can just shoot everyone in your path like the true monster you are at this point. I mean, as one of the loading screens says, there is no difference between what is right and what is necessary.
Okay, well, that's all well and good. So then why are there so many cutscenes in games?
Because we as people love stories. We love to tell them, and we love to have them told to us. In the grand scheme of things, video games are still such an adolescent art form that we're still clinging to tried and true techniques with the occasional experimentation that pushes us all forward. Many of us may love cutscenes. I mean, heck, when I asked everyone what your thoughts on them were in a poll, the majority of you said the more the better. Seeing the incredible spectacle of what technology in our games is capable of will seemingly never get old. Watching the falling of the plate in the FF7 remake perfectly encapsulates just how helpless we are to stop such a tragedy while also looking absolutely insanely detailed and impressive. Others might enjoy cutscenes as a bit of a breather from time to time. Honestly, I feel that. Playing through Bayonetta 3 is an intense roller coaster ride, and the cutscenes were a great way to kind of recalibrate and relax for just a moment before jumping back into the insanity. And other times, it's as simple as just enjoying the story. Cutscenes, cinematics, and the talking tour all at the end of the day exist as plot delivery systems to the player.
So then all is good then, right? Cutscenes are fine and we can just move on like we've never watched this video? Well, not exactly. As Mommy Zabraxa used to say about my drawings and art class, it could be better.
The video game medium still desperately needs to push and work on active storytelling. Environmental and experiential narrative is clearly something that is still lacking immensely, and people are desperate for it more than ever. How do I know that? Because every single time a game even taps into this just a little bit, Spec Ops The Line, Katana Zero, Breath of the Wild, and most recently as of the publishing of this video, Elden Ring, every time something like these come out, people just won't shut up about how good the storytelling is. Clearly there's a distinct lack of interactive narrative, which is ironic in an industry where the sole distinction is said interactivity. Now, don't take this as some way too long and drawn out video about how I'm anti-cutscene or anything. That's not the point here. Please, I hope that's not the conclusion people come to. Loss of control can actually be an excellent narrative tool in its own right. Cutscenes can be a mostly risk-free form of plot conveyance, or heck, even a technical marvel. My hope, though, is that we as players can get something more, that we can continue to see new and immersive methods of storytelling that no other art form can replicate. And most importantly, I hope that developers will always remember to keep us playing more than watching, since that's what games are absolutely best at. As Reddit user Alcopops said over 10 years ago, quote, "It's like how you always hear that movies should show, not tell, because that's where cinema's strength lies. Much like cinema ought to take advantage of the fact that it can show images and play music, video games ought to take advantage of the fact that they can involve their audience in the story."
So the next time you're playing a game and you're watching a 5-minute long cutscene or taking along yet another talking tour, just remember the wise words of Mama Zabraxi. It could be better. But with that, I'm off to finish coloring in my drawing of a giraffe, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!